Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of Heal Yourself, A Return to Wholeness, the integration of body, mind, soul, and spirit. I'm also the author of Twin Flame Romance, The Journey to Unconditional Love. All of my books are available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible books. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for subscribing below. Click on that bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I do readings, 30, 60, and 90-minute readings, Twin Flame Romance, Life Path, and Purpose. You can book that at my website, michellefondinauthor.com. Welcome to Twin Flame Guidance. Today, we're going to talk about what is spiritual ego and how can I recognize it? We're going to address this topic here, and then for further explanation on how you can red flag yourself on spiritual ego, you can go to my group coaching page and sign up to become a member, and there's going to be more in-depth conversations surrounding this topic in the group coaching. So what is spiritual ego? Okay, so let me first explain to you guys. We are multi-dimensional beings. And this is something I do explain in my meditation course, that we are multi-dimensional beings. So we have a physical body, we have our emotional body, we have our spiritual body, we have our mind, intellect, and ego. And of course, we always have our soul, we always have our spirit. But the question is, what part or aspect of ourselves do we have a tendency to live from for most of our lives? In fact, most of us live most of our lives through the lens of the ego and, of course, the mind and intellect. But the ego does take precedence when it comes to the outer expression of who you are in this world. So, the ego encompasses your personality, of course, right? It's how you assert yourself, how you assert your will and desire on this earth plane. It's something we learn as small children as we are developing and growing. It's how the child learns to differentiate themselves from their parents and caretakers. This is my toy, this is my food, this is my chair. And so we develop this sense of self through our ego lens. And then as we are moving on up in our lives and developing and growing, this becomes more magnified. Now, the ego in itself is not a bad thing at all. And I talk about this in my Twin Flame Divine Feminine boot camps. There are other videos that I've published on this channel that really speak a little bit more about the ego. But it's not bad in and of itself. Like all by itself, the ego isn't a bad thing. In fact, it can be really useful in life. However, the downside of the ego is that it is more a survivalist instinct. So the self, as it perceives itself through the ego, is designed for survival. And you know this through the fight or flight. Oh, it's now called the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so we know this because we tend to live in fear. We tend to go into defensive mode. We tend to defend ourselves and who we are, and we become pretty self-centered. Now, it's not to say that inherently this is completely wrong. There are certain instances in which you need to have a healthy ego in order to move about this earth. But for most of the population, the way they live their lives through jealousy and fear and possessiveness and greed, those are kind of the negative aspects of ego. So think about all those negative aspects of ego and how they present themselves to the outer world as you are moving about life. So just think about like all of the things, like when you get angry, upset, jealous, possessive, this is mine. When you get hyper competitive and you want to like squash the competition, when you get jealous of other people or envious even. Those are all negative ego traits. Now, we all know as you embark upon this twin flame journey and perhaps other aspects of life, because a spiritual awakening can happen at different moments throughout life. It does not have to be because of a twin flame connection. But oftentimes in the twin flame connection, that is a person's first major experience in spiritual awakening. So to that end, we have lived most of our lives through the lens of the ego. Then all of a sudden, we have this widening of perspective where we start to see our higher spiritual selves in various situations and forms, whether that comes through angelic guidance, meditation, telepathy, messages that you receive from the universe, coincidences, synchronicities, signs, angel numbers, whatever it happens to be. And then we embark upon this spiritual journey that can also be accompanied by something that we refer to as a Kundalini awakening. Now, here's where it gets really sticky. The sticky situation of a spiritual awakening is if you have not recognized the ego as the main focus of your life for your entire life up until the moment of your spiritual awakening. Now, we have glimpses into the soul, right? We do. We have moments in time where we glimpse into the soul, we live from our higher spiritual selves, and then we recognize, oh, well, maybe that ego-based behavior is not so great. But usually for a person who hasn't embarked upon a spiritual journey of themselves, those moments are fleeting. The moments that you touch your spirit are very fleeting, and oftentimes people find that they cannot find them again. They were like, oh yeah, I was feeling this amazing unconditional love for the whole planet, and it lasted, like an hour because I went on this amazing hike and I hiked to the top of this mountain, and then I saw the sunset and I felt at one with humanity and all of the earth. And then, you go back down to earth, and then you enter into your home and your dog is barking and your kids are shouting and your husband's mad at you or whatever. And then you're like, oh, okay, this is real life now. So those moments of touching spirit tend to be very fleeting. And when you finally come to a spiritual awakening, it's like the heavens open up and all of this information is poured out onto you as far as the epiphanies of, oh my gosh, there's another way to live. I can live from my higher spiritual self. I don't need to live in fear all the time. I can move toward unconditional love. But then the problems tend to arise with something called spiritual ego. And the reason is because if you are spiritually awakening, but you have not yet recognized the ego and the ego self and the way the ego expresses itself, then it's almost as if, okay, I'm going to give you a metaphor here because I tend to work better in metaphors and hopefully it'll help you to better understand. Let's suppose that you're driving on the expressway and you get one flat tire. One of your 4 tires is completely flat. You get it towed to a service station where they tell you, well, this tire is a goner. Like, there's no way we can save this tire. Maybe you could get it fixed to use as a spare, but there's no way, we have to replace it. So you get a replacement tire. They put the replacement tire on and you ask if you can keep the tire that was flat, right? You ask to keep it. Now, instead of just putting it in your trunk and seeing if you can repair it to have like a spare tire around, you decide, oh, I just want to tie this to the back of my car for some odd reason, right? I'm going to tie it to the back of my car with one of those little bungee cord things, or I don't know what they're called, cables. And then you allow that tire to just like bounce around on that cable as you're driving. Well, I don't know why you would do that. I'm just trying to give you a visual. But let's say it didn't fit in your trunk or something. So you tie it to the back. And as you're driving around, yes, you have 4 working tires, but in the back of your car, you have this tire that is just hooked on to the back of your car, and it's just like bouncing around, wreaking havoc, making your drive a lot less smooth. And when you come to a sudden stop, it's gonna pop up and like dent your car. And so it's like wreaking all this havoc, and you're like, well, this doesn't make sense. I just wanted to keep the tire. Why is it wreaking all this havoc? Well, it's because it's not in its proper place, right? You should be in your trunk and you decided to tie it to the end of your car because maybe, I don't know, your trunk was full of garbage or something. And so you have it tied to your car, but it's not quite in its right place. And so it's just wreaking havoc. The same thing goes with the ego. If the ego is not set in the right place, meaning if it's not put in its place by you consciously, it's going to wreak havoc while you are focusing on your spiritual growth. And how does it wreak havoc? It's going to show up in the places where you are riding smoothly. Just like the car with the 4 working tires, right? Where you thought, oh, well, I've got a new tire now, my car should drive smoothly. But it's not, because you've tied the broken tire to the back of your car. What happens is people look like they're on a spiritual journey, and you are on a spiritual journey, but then there's all this weird stuff that tends to come up that makes it look like, well, this person who's on a spiritual journey is acting really crappy, because that's not what I would conceive someone who is really deeply spiritual to act like. So I'm going to give you some examples so you can just like recognize phrases that people who are on a spiritual journey but who still have an unchecked ego might say to you. So the first phrase is, "This is the right thing. How could you not know that?" Let's just explore this a little bit. This is the right thing. How could you not know that? And so the ego wants to be right at all costs. Let's just put it that way. The ego wants to be right at all costs. And the ego wanting to be right at all costs is going to try to prove somebody else wrong. And so if you are on a spiritual journey, and let's say you're learning a new thing about opening up into higher spiritual consciousness, and you had this epiphany that, oh, meditation takes you to higher planes and it takes you to different levels of consciousness. And somebody says to you, well, meditation's been really hard for me. It's hard for me to quiet my mind. My mind is just like thinking hundreds of thousands of thoughts a day. It has never worked for me. So it's great that that works for you, but it doesn't really work for me. And you reply to them like, this is the right thing to do. How could you not know that? Are you stupid or something? You know what I mean? So, and it's the righteousness of the awareness that is part of the ego. It's that piece of the ego not being in its proper place, not being in check, that is going to lead you to say something like that. Because a spiritually awakened person who has put their ego in a box, if you will, or put their ego in check and says, hey, I'll check in with you later. You can come to me when I have to do things like go get a job. But for now, we're just going to keep you in check. A spiritually awakened person in that same instance where they might be trying to tell somebody about the amazing experiences of meditation, and that person replies the same thing where they've tried, they have a busy mind, they can't possibly meditate. The person who is really spiritually aware and open and humble, because that's what spirituality brings to you when you're open and living for your higher spiritual self, of course, they might say something like, well, you know, I found that too when I first started to meditate. I found that my mind just thinks so many hundreds of thousands of thoughts, and I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to stick with it. But you know, I just tried and I practiced, and with a little bit of practice, I was able to really sit still, and I'm gaining some benefits from it. So perhaps if you want to try, you could do this and maybe sit with it, you know, a couple minutes a day and add a minute every day. So there's this sense of empathy and understanding and really bridging to the other side of where you were prior to your spiritual awakening. So that's just one example of how somebody might show up who still has this spiritual ego, or the ego attached to their spiritual awakening. The second phrase is, I've been on the spiritual path for decades now. I've done so much work, I know all there is to know. Okay, that might sound funny to you right now, But this is something that I hear being a coach, a life coach, having been a meditation and yoga teacher since 2008, being an Ayurvedic lifestyle practitioner, doing readings for people. So I hear this quite often, actually, and not exactly packaged in the same way, but pretty much that's what they're saying. It's almost like, you can't teach me something new. You can't tell me something new. I've heard it all. I've studied it all. I've been there. I've done that. And Dr. Wayne Dyer, who I quote a lot on this channel because he was truly one of my mentors, and also Dr. Deepak Chopra, Dr. David Simon. It was one of those three. I can't remember exactly who it was, but they all said this in different ways. But the phrase that came through from them being my spiritual teachers was, always remain a beginner. Always remain a beginner. If you remain a beginner, and I really believe that's from Zen Buddhism, in all honesty, if you always remain a beginner, there is always something to learn. So I have approached the topic, the situation of spirituality exactly in that way for my entire existence. Even when I was practicing yoga, and I would, believe me, I've heard it all. I would get oftentimes yoga students who would come into the studio saying, like, do you have levels here? Because like, I'm a level 5 yogi. And I'd be like, I don't know, I'm a level 1. So here I am, like, I will teach you, but that's where I'm at right now. And, and I was practicing yoga. I was teaching actually yoga about 13 hours a week. So if you want to call that beginner, I don't know, but I really needed to take the mindset of, I am always a beginner. I'm always learning, and I never quite reach mastery. Because when you reach mastery according to you and your ego, then there's no room for growth. There's no room for change and growth and expansion. In reality, it's limitless, right? The possibilities are limitless. So that is ego versus spiritual versus. And then the last phrase I'm going to give you, and then of course, in my group coaching page, I'm going to add in how to recognize the red flags in yourself so that you can modify your behavior, keep your ego in check while you're on this spiritual journey. So lastly, the phrase is, let me give you some corrections because you are wrong, and then proceeds to correct others. So I find this really humorous too. And here's why I find it humorous, because I am on a YouTube channel. I have my own YouTube channel here. And throughout the years that I've been doing YouTube, and of course, like, it's funny to believe this, and this is one of the reasons why I've created the whole group coaching and the community and everything, to focus a little bit more on that right now. But believe it or not, like last year, well, I guess in 2019 through 2020, my YouTube channel was getting a lot more views. So I was getting anywhere between 70,000 and 100,000 views per month on my channel. And so the videos were getting a lot more exposure. And because of that, I was seeing comments from various people around the world. And it was really funny to me because it was almost like there was this sense of some people absolutely needing to correct and needing to say, like, oh, well, let me correct you on this thing or this thing or this thing. And that's very much spiritual ego, right? It's very much spiritual ego, because it's like, I am right and you are wrong. Let me show you the way because you are completely wrong. And so anytime that you want to make somebody else wrong, that is ego. Someone who is in a spiritual space might say something like, oh, you've got an interesting point there. This is what I have heard from my past. And so it's interesting to see how we all have different points of view when it comes to this topic or this topic on spirituality. And again, that leads me to Dr. Deepak Chopra, Dr. David Simon, and Dr. Wayne Dyer, who again are my mentors. And the phrase that I heard very often was, here is my way. What is your way? The right way doesn't exist. And I always like that, because then it helps you to keep an open mind to just listening to others. And when you do that, you create connection. And when you think about it, spirituality is about connection, and it is about cohesiveness. It is about bringing people together. It is about universality and love connection And anytime you want to create division, that is ego, even on a spiritual journey. It's called spiritual ego. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on that bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this video with other twin flames. And thank you so much for your support of my YouTube channel. You can buy a book or 2 or 3. You can join a boot camp. You can also join my group coaching and community page. The link is below. And I will see you in the next video.